win for the families pushing for bans on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines after the Annunciation mass shooting.
Also calling for another gun safety measure, a ban on high-capacity magazines.
Now, this proposed ordinance bans assault weapons, high-capacity magazines, and ghost guns.
The best way to honor victims isn't through symbolic prohibition of a particular category of arms, but by preventing the next attack.
I think Minnesotans are clear with us. They are in favor of a ban.
The bill includes $20 million for school safety and millions more for mental health support.
Restrictions on public carrying and safe storage, which includes stricter requirements for reporting lost or stolen firearms.
You voted for the A50 amendment. You voted to keep firearms more easily accessible to convicted violent felonies. You voted to continue the sale of weapons of war, assault weapons in Minnesota.
Minnesota's Senate just passed a sweeping gun control package, and I need you to understand exactly what happened, what's in it, and where it's going. Senate File 2, the Omnibus Public Safety Bill, passed the Minnesota Senate on a razor-thin 34 to 33 party line vote. Every single DFL member voted yes. Every single Republican voted no. Not one person crossed the aisle. It includes an assault weapons ban, a high-capacity magazine ban, mandatory storage requirements, restrictions on binary triggers, a ban on unserialized ghost guns, and more. And now I'm going to break down exactly what this means for you, what's actually in this bill, and why it may already be dead on arrival in the Minnesota House. If you live in Minnesota, if you own an AR-15, if you have standard capacity magazines, if you have any semi-automatic rifle that falls under their definition of assault weapon, this bill was written with you in mind, and not in a good way. Senate File 2 is a comprehensive package, and that word comprehensive is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. The DFL leadership deliberately bundled gun control provisions together with school safety funding and mental health resources. That's not an accident. That's a strategy. By tying things that have broad bipartisan support, school hardening, mental health care, to things that are deeply controversial, like banning entire categories of commonly owned firearms, they create a political trap. Vote against the bill and they say you voted against school safety. Vote for it and you just banned AR-15s. Senator Ron Latz, the DFL chair of the Senate Judiciary and Public Safety Committee, has been pushing this for 20 years. He said so himself. He called this a historic day, the first time an assault weapons ban has ever passed the Minnesota Senate. And on that narrow point, he's right. It is historic.
Access to firearms can turn emotional crisis and a tragic loss. Now's not the time to act because emotions are too high. That's what we hear in the immediate aftermath. To oppose these changes didn't have time to consider what steps to take.
But historic doesn't mean constitutional, and it sure doesn't mean it's going to become law.
What steps can reduce firearm fatalities and loss. And I will remind members it's not just about suicide or homicides, it's about suicides too. Country, historically, with the red flag laws, where they had 11 to 14% reduction in suicide rates. Cause of death in Minnesota by firearms, it's not homicide, actually, it's suicide.
So let's get into what's actually in Senate File 2. First, the assault weapons ban. This provision targets semi-automatic rifles, pistols, and shotguns based on a features test. We're talking about thumb hole stocks, pistol grips, adjustable stocks, threaded barrels, the usual cosmetic characteristics that have absolutely nothing to do with how a firearm actually functions. If your rifle has one of these features, it falls under their definition of assault weapon. This is nearly identical to what we saw in Illinois with the Protect Illinois Communities Act. That law is currently being challenged in federal court in Barnett v. Raoul and has already been the subject of heated litigation over Bruin compliance. The same legal vulnerabilities apply here.
Leaders across the metro are also calling for another gun safety measure, a ban on high-capacity magazines.
Big win for the families pushing for bans on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines after the Annunciation mass shooting.
Now, this proposed ordinance bans assault weapons, high-capacity magazines, and ghost guns.
The bill includes $20 million for school safety and millions more for mental health support.
Restrictions on public carrying and safe storage, which includes stricter requirements for reporting lost or stolen firearms.
Second, magazine capacity limits. Senate File 2 restricts magazine capacity, banning what they call high-capacity magazines. Let me be clear here, these are standard capacity magazines. The magazines that ship from the factory with your Glock 17, your AR Bina 15, your SIG P320, those are standard. Calling them high capacity is a rhetorical trick designed to make normal gun ownership sound extreme. Third, the bill bans binary triggers. These are trigger systems that fire one round on the pull and one on the release. They've become a target for legislators who don't understand that they still fire one round per trigger function. This is not a machine gun, but that distinction doesn't matter to the people writing this bill. Fourth, the ghost gun ban. Senate File 2 goes after unserialized, privately manufactured firearms, including 3D printed guns. Now, homemade firearms have been legal in the United States since before the United States existed. This provision directly challenges a tradition that predates the Second Amendment itself. Fifth, and this is the one that really got Republicans fired up on the floor. The bill actually includes a provision that restricts the ability of trained, licensed individuals to concealed carry in schools. Think about that. In a bill that's supposed to be about protecting kids, they're removing one of the tools that could actually protect kids. Republican Senator Steve Drazkowski made this point forcefully during floor debate. He pointed out that the Annunciation School shooter, the very tragedy that inspired this legislation, chose that school specifically because it was a gun-free zone. The shooter studied manifestos from other mass shooters. He picked a soft target on purpose, and this bill's response is to make schools even softer.
Randy, House Democrats have a package of 7 gun safety bills, and they had 2 of them in committee today.
If you needed a graphic reminder of what gun violence does and ripping us apart, that is a pretty moving tribute.
Elected officials have a duty to protect us from guns. No one should have to go through what we went through at Annunciation.
The best way to honor victims isn't through symbolic prohibition of a particular category of arms, but by preventing the next attack.
Now, here's where the process gets really important, and this is where I think you can actually breathe a little. The Minnesota House is split 67 to 67. That's a dead tie. The Republican Speaker of the House, Lisa Demuth, controls the floor calendar. By all accounts, this bill may never even get a vote in the House. That's not a guarantee, but it's the current reality. Republicans in the House have signaled they'd be willing to pass the school safety and mental health funding portions of this bill, but only if they're separated from the gun control provisions.
Banning assault weapons, ghost guns, and binary triggers may violate the Constitution, according to Republican senators.
The data are actually pretty clear about this. High-capacity magazines, when they're used, more people die.
There's still bad people entering schools. We need a different approach.
The DFL refused to allow that split in the Senate.
You voted for the A50 amendment. You voted to keep firearms more easily accessible to convicted violent felonies. You voted to continue the sale of weapons of war, assault weapons in Minnesota. You voted to allow loose and unsafe storage of guns on school property.
The amendment to strip out the firearms restrictions and send just the school safety money to the House was voted down on party lines. Senator Latz was asked directly whether he'd accept a split bill if the House sent back just the school funding and mental health provisions, and his answer was telling. He didn't say yes. He said, quote, "That remains to be seen. That tells you everything you need to know about priorities here. If saving kids' lives were truly the #1 goal, you'd pass what you can pass right now. The fact that they're holding school safety funding hostage to an assault weapons ban tells you this is about the guns, not the kids." And let's talk about constitutional reality for a moment, because this matters enormously. In 2022, the Supreme Court decided New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin, and that decision changed everything. Under Bruin, any firearms regulation must be consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearms regulation. The government has to prove that a modern law has a historical analog. Assault weapons bans are being challenged on exactly this basis right now. In Bivas v. City of Naperville, in Barnett v. Raoul, in Ocean State Tactical v. Rhode Island, federal courts are actively wrestling with whether these bans survive Bruin's historical test. Several district courts have struck down similar bans. Others have upheld them. There's a growing circuit split, and that means the Supreme Court is going to have to weigh in eventually. If Minnesota actually passed this into law, it would immediately face legal challenge. Under the current Bruin framework, it would have serious constitutional problems.
Hasn't brought in city and state attorneys who are refusing to to uphold the law. It's safer to visit and live in Venezuela than it is to live and visit Detroit. I own an AR-15, and it's not a weapon of war, and I don't want to hurt anybody. It is a defensive weapon.
Here's my honest assessment. Is the Senate passage a win for gun control advocates? Technically, yes. For the first time ever, an assault weapons ban cleared the Minnesota Senate. That's a milestone they've been working toward for decades, and Senator Latz is right to call it historic from his perspective. But is this becoming law? Almost certainly not this session. The House numbers don't work. The session ends in days. The Republican leadership has no incentive to bring it to the floor. And even if by some miracle it passed both chambers, the legal challenges would be immediate and significant under Bruin. But here's the thing. Don't get complacent. They passed this with the thinnest possible majority because they wanted to set a marker. They wanted to normalize these proposals. They wanted to make the next vote easier. The fact that SF2 got 34 votes in the Minnesota Senate means the infrastructure is in place. One election cycle that shifts the House by a single seat, and suddenly this math changes. Minnesota gun owners need to understand that this threat is not theoretical. It passed one chamber. It's one election away from passing both. And the session ends next Sunday, so the clock is ticking on this particular version, but the ideas behind it aren't going anywhere.
We need to act on the wishes of Minnesotans and for the safety of our kids. I think Minnesotans are clear with us. They are in favor of a ban.
Important action in 23 and 24. We enacted universal background checks and we enacted red flag laws, and those two bills are saving lives today.
Proven to help law enforcement keep guns out of the hands of those who pose a danger to themselves and others. We know far too well the horrors of gun violence that impact our communities.
Responsible, law-abiding gun owners, and I support their ability to exercise their Second Amendment. Assault weapons are designed to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible.
So here's where things stand right now. Senate File 2 has passed the Minnesota Senate 34-33. It now sits in the Minnesota House, where it is unlikely to receive a floor vote before the session ends next week. Your AR-15, your standard capacity magazines, your binary triggers, they are legal in Minnesota today. They will almost certainly remain legal when this session closes. But the vote happened, the precedent is set, and they will try again. Stay informed, stay engaged, and for the love of everything, pay attention to your state legislature races this fall. That's going to determine whether this comes back. That's it for today, folks. I'll see you in the next one.